morning, everyone. My name is Ari. I'll be your moderator for the first panel session. Let me just, briefly introduce the esteemed panelists that we have in panel one. First, on my immediate left is Dr. Andi Rossi. The names are behind. I know we probably should have put it up, but so that you pay attention to their face. So he's the innovation team head for Futurise, and after that is Baevinraj Thiagarajah. He's Jentayu Sustainability Berhad CEO, and we have Nurlin Salleh, Managing Director and Partner at BCG Malaysia, and we have Nadarashnaraj, Partner with Zaid, Ibrahim and Co. So it's also my boss, I'm going to take care of him. Okay. So I think thank you everyone for coming here today. I know tomorrow is a holiday, Deepavali, so thank you for coming here today. Let me start by actually, I think everyone's asking, what is actually a regulatory sandbox? The title is quite obvious, and I think the CEO as well did mention a little bit. So let me start to Dr. Andi actually by asking, for everyone here who's from a diverse background, what is a regulatory sandbox actually?
Morning everyone. Before we start, let's go back to the past. The regulatory sandbox was first mentioned. Regulatory sandbox was introduced way back in 2016 by the UK FCA on regulating the fintech solution. That was in 2016. And at the same time, in 2016, it was mentioned by Baevinraj to foster this fintech solution. That was in 2016. And when it comes to 2018, it was mentioned again. That is in Malaysia by NIMP under the policy of industry forward, the regulatory sandbox again. But however, the definition of regulatory sandbox has been here and there. So to speak, the layman definition, the one that people would know, is to test the innovation, the product, the services, the business model in a safe area. So there is no specific definition on that. However, when it comes to Futurise, we come up with the National Regulatory Sandbox initiative that is focusing not only business model, products or services, but also we look into maybe the title, what different anticipatory regulation. We look further up, what are the things that is not covered in the law itself.
So let me ask you, so from an NIMP perspective, right? So how can actually the REG sandbox or the regulatory sandbox play a key role to help, enable the NIMP ecosystem?
Okay, the way I see NIMP in general, it is meant for manufacturing and services related manufacturing. So basically, it is, in a nutshell, it looks like it's already put the processes for production that is already endorsed, product that is endorsed or innovation that is endorsed by the regulators. Okay, when it comes there, this is where Futurise will look at into those gaps to create the value chain that is not captured in this process line of introducing the product or services.
Okay. Let me just now ask Raj a bit. He's trying to compose it further, so I'll start with him as well. Regulation, as being a lawyer and all that, right? It always, and some people in the industry will tell us, it actually, if you have too much regulation, it prohibits growth or innovation, right? But actually, if you don't have regulation as well, it can also stifle innovation. So, how do we actually design regulation that, promotes growth, doesn't, prohibit innovation? So how would we actually do that?
Thanks, Ari. So, okay, now we will be careful by giving too good an answer because then people say, what's I got it from ChatGPT? So I will give you a not so perfect answer because just to tell you that I know myself. Okay, I think the first question to ask when you're developing regulatory or any rules to govern a subject matter is what is the regulatory objective? Right. So what you mentioned, it is to promote and to attract investment. Then certainty becomes something very important for investors. Investors always look for regulatory certainty before they invest. You want to know what is it that they need to comply, what are the standards, and then put in the investment. Because when there's over-regulation, it tends to increase cost of compliance, and then it becomes expensive. That becomes an hindrance to bringing in investments into Malaysia. The other thing is then, what you mentioned, does regulation, over-regulation then result in stifling innovation? That's where you come in with regulatory sandbox, right? To test, to see how much regulation is required, what is the actual regulation that's necessary. Are we trying to regulate for the sake of regulating? I'm not going on EU bashing spree, but EU came out with the AI law first. The question was then everybody is asking, was it really necessary or was it just to get headlines? That EU was the first few countries to regulate that, right? So I think the first thing that any regulator needs to do is to ask the question, what is the objective of coming up with regulation?
Okay, so I think I just won't let you off the hook just yet. So, but do you think that we do laws, in Malaysia, do we fall into that trap of also announcing too many laws without really asking why from the industries? Or, how should we actually, when we create new legislation or policies, how much should the industry be involved in the actual development of it?
So I think what has forgotten is the benefit of industry self-regulation. Let me take an example. The Communications and Multimedia Act was enacted in 1998. In the act itself, there was a self-made mechanism for the regulator, which is the MCMC, to allow industry to self-regulate. Only when industry has failed does MCMC step in to come up with mandatory standards. And I think it's a brilliant mechanism to regulate because you allow industry to come up with their sector-specific rules, what suits them, and the regulator only sets guardrails. It's like parenting. I have 3 kids. So what we do is, me and my wife will do is that let them play, let them fight, let them come out with their own rules. Don't come and disturb us until there's blood. Only when there's blood, the parent comes in, okay, now you have to be punished, you go stand in front. And that's how regulators should be. Allow industry to play, to innovate, and only step in when you think there's going to be failure, and then only you come up with the legislative mechanism to
okay. Thank you. I think a big part of the NIMP is also the digital transformation. I think one of the pillars of it is trying to make Malaysia, tech up, in terms of how we actually become a more digitally vibrant economy. We've heard a lot about it from the government, always wanting us to be more digital. So let me ask Nurlin, right? Since she's probably gonna answer this first. What do you think actually is the 3 big strategies that the Malaysian economy should really, or regulators or policies that we should actually focus on first? What's your top 3?
I think just taking a step back before that, right, and just reflecting on the presentation that was shared earlier, which I thought was a great presentation. Malaysia is trying to continuously grow in a very competitive market, especially across ASEAN, across our neighboring countries. And as you've seen, we've been falling behind, right? We've developed some great strategies and policies, many of them that have come out in the recent years, and NIMP is a great example of one, right? And it's the right type of policies and strategies that we need to put in place. But what's quite critical is ensuring that those policies and strategies get implemented effectively, right? For us to be able to deliver against those results. I think the challenge that I think everyone's quite familiar with is in Malaysia, the issue is with implementation and how to really make that happen. And as you rightfully pointed out, one of the key thrusts of enabling NIMP to be successful is things like digitalization. And going on about the point that you had mentioned earlier about regulation and how we sort of move things forward and whether we are being over-regulated and that stifles sort of innovation and digitalization, I actually do feel that in Malaysia we have a bit more of a risk-averse culture, which therefore then means that we do have a tendency to rely on legacy regulations and policies that then would stifle our growth and our innovation moving forward. So that's just setting the context of where I think Malaysia is in the broader scheme of things. Now, when you're talking about technology and digitalization, which is a really critical part of NIMP to ensure we're able to move forward, some of the key strategic levers, obviously, please answering your question is obviously infrastructure, right? Infrastructure development, ensuring that there is sufficient accessibility when it comes to access to technology, internet access, so on and so forth. We're actually doing quite well compared to quite a lot of our neighbors, but there are a lot of areas across the country that still requires that access. Talent, right? We've been talking about talent for quite a while, and you saw the earlier chart that was shared. We actually put in a lot in our DE expenditure for education back in, I think it was RK8, but that sort of tapered off a little bit. But understanding the need in terms of talent development and upskilling our people is super critical. And I feel we don't emphasize that enough, and perhaps our methods are still a little bit outdated. And then lastly, in terms of what we're talking about today, which is modernization of regulation, sandboxing, allowing that opportunity for digital innovation to happen in a safe and secure, responsible way for the country. But how do we encourage that, right? Enable people to innovate, enable people to take risks in a safe environment. That's something that we really need to focus on.
Okay, I think I'm going to ask the same question to Bae, actually. Instead of what do you think would be the top 3 that we should do to be more, digital enabled? What is your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Ari. I think before I answer that question again, I would like to go back to the first question.
Sure.
Right. With regards to how can the regulatory frameworks be designed to aid innovation. I think coming from industry perspective, I think regulators need to understand that as a business we face regulations not from one regulator but from tens and hundreds of regulations, right? So a very practical way for regulators to assist businesses is really to make it simple. I think simplification really helps businesses manage the multitude of regulations. Each regulator tends to think that their regulatory framework is the most important, and they try to make it as complete as possible. But if the businesses and the private sector don't understand it, it just doesn't serve its purpose. So simplification and I think principle-based regulation from a business perspective makes a lot of sense. Self-regulation also makes a lot of sense. So that's on the first question. I think on digitalization, I think from an industry perspective, and I've sat in many meetings where we discuss, right, should we make the investment to digitalize a line, machining line, process, and so on and so forth. It ultimately comes down to economics, right? Is this business producing enough to merit the investments necessary for digitalization? So what is the break-even point? How many years to break even, right, in terms of production? So when you decide to digitalize or not, it ultimately comes down to scale, right? So from and the cost-benefit analysis. So in a sense, to encourage digitalization, I would come from a business perspective to say, okay, perhaps we should focus on digitalization in sectors where there is scale, right? Perhaps we should focus on removing distortions in the economy which limits the need for investments. For example, if wages remain low, right, between digitalization, automation, or keeping foreign labor in the country, perhaps that decision becomes much more difficult. But if you constrict and increase wages, I think that would help promote digitalization as well. And finally, I think I won't go for all 3 because I think Nurlin gave really solid points there. But I think I just give an example about how scale really kind of drives automation and digitalization. I was in a meeting with an engineer from China, 35-year-old, and an engineer in Malaysia, both in the same sector, right? The 35-year-old guy was in a market where it was growing 20% per annum, and during his 10-year, 15-year working experience, he has built 5 different plants, right? Doing the same thing. So what I mean is that every 2 years, he will build a new plant, right? Every 2 years, he will expand his capacity by 100% and build a new plant. That 35-year-old engineer, right, has experience of building 5 new plants, compared to our 50-year-old engineer who has only built 1 plant in his lifetime. So the level of change, innovation, and efficiency gains, incorporating of digitalization in that plant is so much, in that 35-year-old engineer, is so much more advanced. So in terms of competition, I think in terms of areas for digitalization, we really need to pick and choose. Because without the necessary scale, it will just be a pipe.
Okay, this is just to add one point. This is not a level for digitalization, but I think a priority is cybersecurity. I think the move towards conventional business to digitalization, one of the key considerations every business, every regulator has to put emphasis on is cybersecurity. Because you can't build the whole digitized business without paying attention to security features. Right? Once there's a breach, once there's a leak of information, that damage is sometimes irreparable for businesses. So this cybersecurity is a key priority when it comes to digitization.
Okay, we'll get back to that and also elaborate on that. I think just another part, because NIP is quite wide, right? So I think the audience would want to know a bit more on, we can't cover everything, but we'll pick and choose what we can cover. I think the issue, another issue that we have is on, actually empowering the local SMEs, or some would say startups or local businesses, to be part of the NIMP. I know it's a big industry push. There's a big call on manufacturing and how do we actually level up and all that. But in terms of how do we, like you were mentioning just now, Babe, in terms of how, that experience from that engineer in China, but how do we actually get our local SMEs to foster, to be part of this, NIP region? Maybe if you were to put yourselves in the lens of a policymaker, how would they enable those policies to allow our SMEs to actually be really leveling up? Because it's big picture. How do we actually just go a bit more on the ground to get the SMEs up, or even our own private businesses to really level up?
That's to me. I think that's a tough one. I think from a policy perspective, exposing our SMEs to the global markets, exposing to the potential for export, I think would be something which Malaysia can do better. Because as I mentioned earlier, with scale, the developments will be quite natural for the SMEs. I think another area which I've seen quite successfully done in Singapore is the integration between SMEs and our and the educational institutions and the funding of R&D. I think I've seen that work quite successfully, where in collaboration with universities funded by government grants, they're able to upskill the SMEs to be globally competitive.
Nurlin, you want to add how can our SMEs actually level up?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, SMEs represent a large portion of our economy, right? We cannot grow, we cannot succeed if our SMEs do not succeed. So it's definitely an important area that we need to focus on. And going back to Baevin's point, which was take the view from the business, take the view from the SME. What is required for them to be successful and to help drive NIMP forward, right? And we want them to help to be the engines of change for NIMP moving forward. So some of the things we can think about is around how can we make it administratively less of a burden for them, streamlining certain administrative processes, so on and so forth, so that they can participate would be one. Secondly, what we've been talking about, which is these regulatory sandboxes in specific sectors and areas where they can participate and put in place innovative products, services, capabilities. I'll give you an example. In NIMP, one of the areas which is not talked about so much is circular economy, right? Circular economy for the manufacturing sector. This is going to become something that is quite important and critical. It's coming definitely from Europe as expectations are coming in for our manufacturers to be able to produce products which are compliant with their standards and requirements for the circular economy. And I think for Malaysia, they recently launched the circular economy blueprint that came out a month or two ago for the manufacturing sector. And what's important is then for SMEs then to think, okay, how can I play in the circular economy space, right? But how can I play in a way that's sort of safe, but still enables me to be able to be commercially successful as well, right? So some form of regulatory sandbox that helps them to explore these areas for the circular economy would be critical for them. Bevin talked about exposure as well as sort of talent and skills development. We'll be helping SMEs to be able to explore new areas and sectors which would be critical and important. And then lastly, I think you touched upon it earlier as well, is around access to capital and funding. We go back to the point of for these SMEs, they need to make this commercially successful for them. How can they make this commercially successful if it requires significant capex, which they don't have, because cash flow is a big issue for some of these SMEs. So what can we do? What are some of the different interesting, innovative funding mechanisms that we can help support them with? Be it government grants, PPP models that could come in, which could allow both government and some form of co-financing scheme from the private sector. A good example, and actually something that NIMP is already putting in place, is COSIF, right? Which is something that they've been working together with the Securities Commission on as well. So there are different models, but I would say these are the things that are important. Putting in place the right regulatory environment to enable them to innovate, talent and upskilling capabilities, funding, innovative funding models that can help support the SMEs to be able to take part and participate in NIMP as well.
Okay, thank you. I think another question I think I would like to ask Dr. Andi, I mean, in terms of our regulatory sandbox, what Nurlin mentioned as well, which is needed, is what success stories do you think that you can showcase from a regulatory sandbox, be it Malaysia, what you've done, or globally, that can actually be, that's a good example in which it has worked, and that's why a lot of industries and regulators should utilize sandbox. I'll ask Dr. Andi first, and maybe Raj can come in after that.
Right. I think success story when it comes to financial sectors, I think as you can see, it is under the review of Baevinraj. There's a lot of financial solutions out there right now from the fintech sandbox, for example, like digital banking. That's one thing. For non-regulatory segment, non-fintech regulatory sandbox, based on our experience that we've been dealing for the past 4 to 5 years, most of the success story, I think, most significant one during the pandemic times. So we work together with Ministry of Health to regulate the medical consultation over the internet. So in that project, that sandbox, we try to test not the innovation, we are testing the provisions set in the soft law that we developed for MH. As you can see, under the Ministry of Health, there are many divisions and they are stand guided by their own acts. And all these acts, basically, they have standard procedures and whatnot. And in order for us to come up and streamline from pharmacy, from the Malaysian Medical Council, from the traditional medicine, lots of nursing, X-ray and whatnot. So we are looking at several acts at the same time and try to find the gap, what are the things that we can put in the soft law. So that would be the most of the success story for NLS perspective, where the industry players can render the service to the internet in the sandbox, virtual sandbox. So we are testing on the divisions, and that is something that existing app, but however the business model for that kind of business falls in the gray area of the law. For emerging technology, for example like autonomous vehicle or advanced mobility, that is slightly different because there is no specific act or even regulation to foresee that. So at Futurise we come up with something that from the very basic of non-regulatory instruments such as SOP, where we get all the feedback from the regulators. The regulators set all the procedures and requirements simply because these emerging technologies that is not even yet to be commercialized, they need to adhere to safety, public safety. Because obviously regulator will say, look, this is something totally new, we cannot anticipate. Futurise, can you help us to come up with something that to anticipate new things? So that's where we come to provide services to the regulators.
I think you're right in terms of anticipatory regulation is a key part of helping innovation or growing innovation and businesses and all that. And Raj, maybe how would you say how you feel industries can actually use this sandbox in terms of to help them in maybe anticipatory regulation or ease the burden of doing businesses? How would you see that?
I think one of the benefits of regulatory sandbox is, of course, to test the product before the actual regulations are launched. It doesn't have to be seen purely with regulatory protection that regulators will do. You could also look at it as regulators or even promoters coming up with a platform where SMEs can test their products in a cyber-safe environment. So it's an isolated environment. You can put in your systems, you can put in the data. It's protected so that you don't have hacking threats, and develop it that way and see whether it works. And then from there, SMEs can see how much do they need to invest into protecting the technology, protecting the offering, and then they can plan their budget. Because it becomes very important for them to know how high a wall they have to build to protect their offerings. With that kind of isolated sandbox, so to speak, it really helps these SMEs to grow. I think the second thing that's always forgotten when it comes to SME growth is intellectual property. Because a lot of these technologies are new and they don't know whether they should register it as a patent, as an industrial design, or copyright, and that kind of an education process becomes very important for SMEs. That's the last thing you think of when you come into the business, right? You think of investing into your business first, not looking at all these intellectual property issues, which is actually very critical. You only think about it when you're going to sell your business, and then you say, oh, I don't have actually the rights to this, right? But I think government then comes in, regulators come in at that inception point to tell them, hey, look, you're coming up with a very good idea here. Don't forget to go and see my IPO because you probably need to register.
Although we covered a little bit on talent just now, but it's a really important point with the NIMP. I think the government's trying to, through the NIMP to build a stronger talent pool, right? But can I just ask maybe Bae or whatever, and Nurlin can start off as well in terms of how do we actually build Malaysia's talent pool? I know you were talking about it has to come right from the education system, but really how do we get to that level where our industries can actually match that sort of China or the leading economies of this world, right? Because we need that. We don't have critical mass, so whatever we have to make sure we're the best at what we do. I don't want to talk about our neighbors, whatever smaller neighbors, but how do we actually reach that where our workforce, skill force is actually where we need to be in terms of, we can produce those engineers, those, later on maybe we want to talk about the semicon industries, but all those type of talent services require a certain type of graduates that we have or talent. So how do we actually build that?
Pay more.
True. So that's A. So what will B be? Yeah. So, my boss is here, so A is pay more.
I think much smarter people and much smarter person than me will be able to answer this better. But I just come again from an industry perspective. When we look at talent, right, access to talent, talent is a long lead item, right? Because it takes many years to develop somebody to fulfill a certain role. And if you leave that role today and to develop that talent, it's probably too late already. So from an industry perspective, the approach is, one, can I predict what the future is, which is very difficult. Two is, how do I fulfill my current needs quickly? So really access or importation of the required talent as a stopgap measure definitely would facilitate. But of course, I think from a regulatory perspective, you would want to then replace it over time through localization initiatives, right? So for me, for businesses to be able to be competitive, it would be nice to have stopgap measures where we can access international talent to fill the skill gaps, which is urgently required today. But then with a clear plan for the industry to be responsible for localization of those positions.
Let me just ask you, do you think it's easy to get foreign or global talent to come to Malaysia, or do we need to work on that part of the regulation to make it easier for us to get talent to come in? I mean, we talk about brain drain coming out, but it's also about how do we get them in easier. Do you think this?
Yeah, okay. I think it's a difficult question for me to answer because it's different industries have different requirements. So for example, like for the automotive industry, I think if you want to fulfill the EV kind of electrification requirements, you need quantity, not only the type of capabilities, but you need it in adequate quantity to actually create a minimum scale requirements to fulfill industry requirements. Similarly with the semiconductor industry. So from, if you ask me, do we have it? I'm not sure, because different industries would have different pain points in terms of security.
Nurlin?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how many people know this, but if you look at STEM intakes in Malaysian universities now, it's all going down. So what that means is graduate engineers that we're getting in the country, the numbers are going down, which is a big issue, for us to be able to deliver against NIMP, because like where are you going to get this talent from that you need, right? And then there's also the question of are our higher education institutes pivoting fast enough to meet those needs as well, right? Devin mentioned there's a long lead time to be able to get this kind of talent. So do we need to, number one, think about opening that tap to allow foreign talent to be able to come in? How do we do that? How do we manage that with the current immigration policies and regulations that we have in place? Or what else can we do to have more innovative means of upskilling and training to be able to transition perhaps some of our talent into these new areas a lot faster and a lot quicker, right? I feel like that's something that we really need to think about a lot more, and as we highlighted earlier, the pace of change is happening so fast that we need to be able to move in that direction as quickly as possible as well. That's one part. When we talk about bringing in external talent to live in Malaysia, we talk about the immigration and regulation policies that's hindering that. But ask yourself the question: do they want to come here in the first place? Right? Have we created an environment that attracts these digital nomads or foreign talent to come into the country? And actually, one interesting fact is, because of COVID, people then realize that this whole flexible working and this hybrid way of working is a lot more attractive to the younger generations, right? And therefore, the important aspect of attracting talent to the country is actually the livability of the country, right? The environment that they live in. It might, there's a cost element, correct, when it comes to the salary, but it's also the living environment that they are operating in, and whether this is a place that they want to live, work, raise a family, right? And so making sure we create a conducive environment for foreign talent to come to live is also super critical, which is why cities like KL and Johor need to really focus on that as well to be able to attract the right kind of talent. And that's if we're not able to produce it internally ourselves.
I think Raj gave a good answer. Is there anything you would like to add? Maybe your answer being A is solid, so A more, yes.
Well, no, I think
A is good. Okay, maybe I'll just ask Dr. Andi in terms of what can actually the regular sandbox do actually to help ease, or like you look at, we got to make our city more attractive, livable and all that, right? But in terms of looking at our regulation to also make it easier to us to get the talent, what can the sandbox actually do?
The way I see it, it depends on what type of innovation or technology or product that we would like to portray upfront. Simply because there are certain innovation that, like I said, something we cannot predict. For example, like advanced air mobility. In terms of talent, how we would like to retain this talent? Perhaps there are certain areas of licensing or training for pilots. So that is something that they can to be the future pilots for these new types of aircraft. But for those in digital innovation type of products, the fundamental of basic education should be there. For example, like AI. AI is something new and it cut across different industry. Hence why we will go back to the higher education, where we need to have a fundamental of maybe programming, maybe machine learning, because we cannot really tailor-make certain training modules for this type of new type of talent that we're trying to seek for. So it depends on what type of innovation that we're talking about. For the emerging ones, as long as there is some state-guided existing requirement, then we use that. For the something that is totally outreach, we go back to the basic, which is the fundamental education.
I think one final topic from me as moderator is asking everyone here about sustainability and maybe ESG. That was a big buzzword last year. This year is AI, but it's still very relevant to us today. And I think NIMP also focuses on sustainability. But let me just ask in terms of, we have seen a lot of investments in data centers, for example, a lot of big drives in that, and that surely could be at the expense of, I'm just wondering, is it at the expense of our sustainability goals? We have a net zero that we try to do. So I think, Bae, if you can start it off, like, do you think that, our sustainability or ESG type of regulation is still valid, or is it like, after all these data centers, it's taken aback? Where are we now, actually?
Tough question.
I was trying to figure that one out as well.
I thought I mentioned to you I shouldn't be the start to answer questions. So, data centers clearly demand a lot of power, right? And clearly with that demand, it stresses up the power system in the country. And to fulfill the data centers requirement, we probably need to increase our fund, right? And invest in the upgrading of the grid. I think Malaysia is blessed with sunlight, although the ingredients is not the best, but I think it's still manageable. I think we have adequate rainfall, we have ability to harness hydropower and renewable power in that sense. So I think in terms of promoting the data centers, I don't see anything negative about it, provided we plan and we have a gradual development of that sector in line with our development plan for the future. So I think if you do appropriate planning, you will be able to actually have the best of both worlds. But more fundamentally on ESG and this carbon neutrality and stuff. I think it would be nice if there is a more demand-led requirement that let the consumers make the choice as opposed to a supply push initiative, right? So providing choice to consumers in terms of whether to consume green power or brown power, to me would be a more fundamentally stable way of promoting sustainability and ESG as opposed to a regulation-driven, top-down-driven approach. But that's just me.
Yeah, maybe can add to that. I think the NIMP itself set the stage where we are on track. It's an enabler to other future how we do things. For example, now we have data center investment. In the future, obviously from all this investment, there will be a ripple trickle down to other type of opportunities. AI for that matter, cloud computing, quantum computing. I mean, we are talking about things that can to reduce the carbon emission through this type of digital way of doing things. That's how I see it. To me, it's still on track. It's just an enabler. How we want to do it, that's up to us to take up.
Yeah.
Maybe I add on. So I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the NIMP, but there are really 6 goals of NIMP or outcomes that they focus on, right? Everything from increasing economic complexity to increasing domestic linkages, high skilled talent, and actually one part, I can't remember all of it, but the last part of it is actually ESG, right, and sustainability. So the way NIMP has been crafted, I didn't craft it, but the way NIMP has been crafted is that there are these 5 or 6 outcomes, and basically all the different strategies and mission statements that sit under them and to hit on each of this. And therefore, investments that come into the country are meant to hit on each of this and ensure that you're able to meet all of these different KPIs, which includes this ESG element of it. So it's factored in, it is considered, and the way it's been made is to balance this need that Malaysia has between obviously economic development, ensuring nobody gets left behind in terms of sort of the social aspects, but also ensuring long-term sustainability of our people, country, and planet as a whole. Right? That's the focus, and that's basically what NIMP is meant to focus on. Now you talk about DCs, yes. DCs bring in that investment, but on the flip side of DCs is what benefits can DCs bring for the country, right? Yes, they consume power, green power. Yes, they consume natural resources like water, so on and so forth, which is a cause for concern. But there's a question of, therefore, what can we expect from these investments to help support the country? Be it jobs, not their direct jobs, but indirect jobs that they are able to create as a result. You know, the digital economy that we want to create and so on and so forth. But what else can they bring to the country, right? It's looking at investment in totality and not just in putting in sort of the monetary economic aspects of it. So I think, going back to your question of are we on the right track? I think all the right indicators and outcomes are there, but I go back to my original point, which is implementation is critical, and if we can't implement that in the right way, then yes, there will be cause for concern.
So just very quickly.
Yes, please go ahead.
So I think when you talk about ESG, it's always focused on the T. People then forget the S and G, which is your social and governance perspective. Right? So for a market to be sustainable, and this is a topic that we and Dr. Katina are using participants to use, this is the dear topic to us is competition. In the market, there must be good competition, and for the industry to thrive and innovation to flourish. Secondly, things like trade practices and deployment practices. So the social aspect of ESG also has to be given a lot of emphasis. So I mean, just to close the market is that in looking at ESG, it's not just to focus on the environmental aspect, but also on the SG for those markets.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to throw a curveball at my panelists today and just maybe ask everyone, is there one question that the panel would like, the floor would like to ask anyone in the panel before Brera? Yes, go ahead. We'll just pass the mic. Yeah, so we just have room for one person. I promised them a certain time. So,
hello.
yes.
Thank you. My name is Troy. Well, I think it's a useful and interesting session. Now, I'm just thinking that when you're talking about regulatory sandbox, and of course the industries are going to be covered will be quite diverse. But I think at our stage of development this time, there are many precedents that we can look at. We don't have to actually start everything from our own environment here. Now, moving on from there, I think it will serve the purpose a lot better if our legal fraternity or people who are drafting the law will engage with the industry players. Because in the past, I think we have noticed a lot of legislation, although it's good in the drafting and all that, but it's actually inconsistent with reality that affect the industry. So that's a very broad statement. Secondly, I think I'm particularly attracted with the ESG. Last week I attended a session by another group of practitioners. And of course, what we were told, the question that I posed, okay, the responsibility can be cascaded down, I mean, in your legal kind of concept. Now here, if you're talking about producing something, because industries, they use different components, and if you talk of construction, we use materials like steel bars, pipes, and so on. They can be ceiling approved, they can be what they call British standard, and so on. Now, over time, problems arise. Now, who do you hold the problem responsible? Is that the builder? But the builder is making use of material from other suppliers. So how do you then deal with this kind of problem? You're talking about environment, sustainability, and governance. Now, it seems like if we are not careful, you are going to focus the responsibility on the particular industry that deliver a final product which comprises of materials produced by others. Then how do you cascade down the responsibility? Now that becomes a very complex problem, and I don't think anybody can answer. Hopefully you can throw some light, because it is a serious matter that we have to address. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think the first one on how industry and regulators can work together, I think I'll just ask Dr. Andi, and maybe after that, Zaid and the rest of the panelists can try to put some light. Go ahead.
Okay, when it comes to drafting, the one that at Futurise we come up with the soft law, non-regulatory instruments, soft law or SOPs. When we develop such SOPs or guidelines, we develop together with the regulators as well as with the industry through public consultation session or online public consultation or throughout session such as workshop and whatnot. So when we develop these guidelines for soft law, we will go back to the existing law that is related to that particular topic. So it's not really one-sided. We take note all the comments and feedback from respective stakeholders in order for us to come up with a guideline. And obviously this guideline will develop not just the law itself, as well as the policy set by specific industries. So that's how we design our guidelines for soft laws.
Just maybe some comments on before we wrap it up.
Yeah, I think thanks, Mr. Chua. I think your point on ESG and the complications it poses across the supply chain is well noted. I think from the perspective from what I wish, right, is for these complexities to be resolved through market-based mechanisms, because it's clearly not simple how the risks are being assigned across the value chain. I think regulations are there to help create more transparency in terms of the carbon being generated, but I think for the system to be more stable, I believe it should not be, as I mentioned earlier, it should not be a top-down driven approach, but a bottom-up where demand for green products would then determine the kind of transparency, data verification, risk assignment, which is then attributed across the value chain. So that's my wish, but I think currently we are in the process of a discovery process where we are trying to figure it out in the industry. And I don't think there is one firm solution to this problem at this point.
Okay, no more curveballs. Thank you so much. So I think I would just like to wrap up panel 1 today, and I would like to thank all my panelists for agreeing to come here and share their thoughts. So with that, thank you very much, everyone.
We invite
Okay, thank you so much to the MC for the kind introduction, and welcome everyone to the second panel session of this year's RegTalk. So my name is Yazid. I am from Zaid, Ibrahim and Co, and I will be moderating the session for today. So the title of the second panel will be Making AI Work for You. Are Malaysian industries and regulators equipped for the future? Ladies and gentlemen, for a bit of backdrop a bit of context, the NIMP 2030 sets out the country's 7-year plan beginning 2023 to achieve 6 goals, namely increasing economic complexity, creating high-value jobs, extending domestic linkages, developing new and existing clusters, improving inclusivity, and as well as enhancing ESG practice. At the same time, and concurrently, the rise of AI is unparalleled, with the commercialization of things such as large language models, which has made AI more accessible to the public as well as industry. However, the question then begins whether or not we are ready for this new development and whether or not we are in fact ready for the rise of AI. So to answer these questions are 4 esteemed speakers on my left, and I would love to introduce them to you. Firstly, on my left is Yang Berbahagia, Datin Shelina, Razaly, Wahi from Abdullah, Chee, and Co. Her practice focuses on aviation and aerospace, as well as being part of the pioneer during the inception of Air Asia Act. So do give her a round of applause. Secondly, I would like to introduce Ms. Zulkarnain, the Managing Director of Cisco Malaysia, a subsidiary of Cisco Systems, a global leader in IT and networking and the development of IP-based networking technologies. Please give a hand. Next to be introduced is Mr. Jonathan Lim Hon Kiat, partner at Mrs. Zaid, Ibrahim and Co. His experience in legal matters pertain to fintech, venture capital, blockchain technology, as well as communication media and technology. We welcome you, Mr. Jonathan. And last but certainly not least, I would like to introduce Professor Insigne Dr. Chee from the University of Malaya, who is the Dean of the Department of the Dean of the Faculty of Computer Science and Information Technology, and specializes in computer vision and machine learning. Please welcome. Okay, thank you so much, and enough of my yapping. I would first like to set the stage for this discussion. First and foremost, I think this question is directed to Professor Chan. So among the goals of NIP, one notable goal seems to be the transformation of 3,000 smart factories into smart factories, as well as increasing the talent pool for AI. However, to set the tone for the discussion, I think the first is, I would like to ask yourself, what are some of the AI use cases currently, aside from, I guess, the most obvious and popular ChatGPT, and which one do you think, in your opinion, is pivotal for driving the objectives of NIMP 2030?
Thank you very much, everyone. So based on my experience and knowledge in this area, I think first off, the things that we're looking at is on predictive AI. So a lot of the issues that we're looking at is on predictions, is a prediction analytics. So regardless what kind of industry, eventually what you try to use machine learning is a predictive tool. So in comparison to what we are fancy now, which is a large language model, they are not really a prediction tool, but they are on a generative tool. So in order to realize the NIPM, eventually there's two most important elements that I always see is missing in Malaysia is the deployment of the machine learning model in the industry or in the company itself to drive decisions. So usually there's a separation between the stakeholders as well as the machine learning or the AI engineers in the company. I realize that AI engineers, they're very fancy that okay, they want this model to be done, they introduce it to the stakeholder, but however, most of these models are not driving the business goal of the companies. So when your model did not drive the business goal or the business model of the companies, it simply won't work. Okay. So for example, in this kind of machine learning environment in the industry practice, there should be two evaluation metrics. It's not simply about the accuracy of the model. I mean, that is what we always see in a lot of presentations to the stakeholders. The data engineers, the machine learning algorithm, or the AI officers keep on emphasize how accurate is the model, but that is not the real goal. One goal, you should have the technical measurement, how good is the model, but the second measurement, I think it's relatively more important to the stakeholder is that with this model, what is my effectiveness? Is it going to improve my service time? Is it going to cut short my labor? Or is it going to make my customer more happy? So that is two type of evaluation metrics, but eventually I see there's a lot of this kind of missing gap between the stakeholders and the data engineers. So it means that most of these machine learning model that's been deployed in the companies does not really go to the beginning until the end. It somehow stops in the third quarter and for the sake of implementing it, and that's it. So this is what I see in a lot of the scenario in the Malaysian context. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Chan. Maybe I'll pass this to Ms. Hana. What type of AI use cases have you dealt with? What type of industries or sectors?
Sure, thanks, Hilmy. I think, so for Malaysia, and I think if we take a step back, sort of the global kind of gold mine that is now generative AI, which really only started end of 2022. Jensen Huang himself only used the word generative AI in 2050, right? So it's actually really new, nascent. So we talk about adoption of especially generative AI, it is going to be very new globally, but especially in Malaysia. Predictive AI, machine learning has been there in a lot of areas, and I do agree with Dr. Chan that it could be improved in terms of adoption. But in terms of generative AI in Malaysia, where I see, and actually we recently had an AI event with my customers and I asked the likes of Petronas, Jabatan Digital Negara Mampu, right, on sort of what use cases they are adopting. And really like sort of the first one is productivity use cases, right? So if you think of the likes of Copilot, ChatGPT, how to improve your working efficiency day to day. So those are the first things that they adopt. And a lot of it is also buy. You buy first, you buy what's off the shelf first. You don't build, you don't have your own GPUs in your data center yet. So you look at what software, what areas to buy that can give you productivity gains, or more importantly, ROI. So I see in terms of use cases that has been deployed in organizations in Malaysia, one is related to productivity. The other one is more specific use cases on sort of like, for example, oil and gas, on, for example, reserves, like reservoir analysis. So again, buying off the shelf using Gen AI technology. So those are the areas, and a lot more on sales and marketing and customer support. That one, again, a lot of off-the-shelf technology that you can buy that leverage Gen AI when you are interacting with customers and leveraging your own in-house data. So those are the few I would say that I see. Oh, the final one is of course chatbot. because you can again get an open source LLM, ingest your own data, and kind of give a kind of feedback to the customer. So Jabatan Digital Negara is working on that internal IT chatbot, for example. So those are some of the examples I see.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, if I may add just a little bit, and bring it slightly closer to home, not so clever an answer between these two. I think one of the use cases that actually caught my eye is Aina Sabrina. Anyone on the floor recognizes who's Aina Sabrina? So Aina Sabrina was a media prima effort of coming up with DJ Aina on BFM. She's a completely AI generated DJ. And I think it goes along the lines of productivity, introducing something that's really new in the market, something for productivity.
Okay, I will check out this AI generated DJ back home. Okay, maybe I'll pass this to Datin Shelina. You've worked in the aviation industry. Do you see any application or use of AI in your experience?
Hi. Yes. So actually, I'll give you an example. You mentioned that I started my aviation, journey with AirAsia. So AirAsia, as you all know, is a low-cost carrier. One of the things that we did was to sign an engine maintenance agreement with Rolls-Royce. Now, there are certain parameters in that engine maintenance agreement, and one of them is that if we want to get a full benefit, we must have a certain number of spare engines for every 4 engines that we have on the wing. So AirAsia being a low-cost carrier, we actually said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to go instead of 4 engines, we're going to go to 5, and then we went to 6. And Rolls-Royce gave us severe pushback. And actually, they said, fine, we'll try it, I think, for the first 2 years. And using, at that time, we didn't call it AI, we called it predictive maintenance, which now, is called predictive AI, right? And with predictive maintenance, we were actually able, in a very practical way, to reduce downtime, to predict in advance when our engines would need to be taken off wing, so that we then save costs and we're still able to avail ourselves of the benefit of that engine maintenance program with Rolls-Royce. So that was many years ago. If we look at aerospace today, those of you familiar with NIMP 2030, it was mentioned, I think, by Nurlin and Hana. Aerospace is one of the priority sectors in NIMP. And there's a reason for that, because aerospace is considered one of the sectors that fulfills increasing economic complexity. It also fulfills ESG, which people are surprised when they hear that, but the reality is the OEMs such as Boeing and Airbus have been imposing year-on-year cost reductions and actually ESG requirements on their supply chain, starting from 8 to 10 years ago. So ESG is not a new concept in aerospace. So when we talk about use cases in aerospace, I think, we also talk about AI readiness and what the company needs. But in the case of aerospace, I don't think they have a choice. They have to adopt AI. Because, like I said, Boeing and Airbus say you need to save costs, you need to improve on your ESG numbers, your ESG performance, and the only way to do that is with the adoption of AI. So like it or not, aerospace companies have to step up. So when they need to adopt AI, it doesn't matter whether they're ready or not, they have to do it. And doing it does involve a lot of cost. So we look at the enablers. The number one enabler in NIMP is enhancing the finance ecosystem. And that's where we have a block. So I think if we're going to be serious about increasing the adoption of AI across all these, not just the 6 priority sectors, but the other 15 sectors in NIMP, then we have to really look at the enablers and decide whether we're going to do that. I mean, I could talk all day, but from I'm the founding secretary of the Malaysia Aerospace Industry Association. I can tell you, financing is a big issue. So on the one hand, the government says, hey guys, we want you to adopt AI, and on the other hand, we have Boeing and Airbus, our customers, who say we need you to adopt AI to continue our supply chain, but we don't have a financing ecosystem to support. So I think it's not enough to just look at the use cases and see what they are. We also need to see whether we have got the support of the system for that.
Okay, thank you so much, Datin Shelina, for that. Quite insightful, especially on financing as a big barrier to its adoption. Maybe I want to sort of get to Mr. Jonathan and ask him this. So, in your experience, maybe in fintech, maybe working in technology, or even what was it again? Shelina? Shelina, sorry. So AI is notorious for issues such as data security, privacy, as well as, and I think a personal concern is things such as over-reliance on AI to make decisions. So how can we assess the readiness of AI, of industries to adopt AI, or even regulators in your view? And what are some of the best practices currently when it comes to adopting AI?
Thanks, sir. I think if I were to take a step back, really for a global outlook, the question of readiness is no longer relevant. AI is here to stay, and it is how fast we can pick up to catch on to the race to make sure that we are there at the cutting edge of where this global evolution is taking place at this point in time. But if you were to perhaps pinpoint and bring it back closer to home to run some matrix and measurement to see whether we are ready or otherwise. Again, very similar, and I think previously the panel was talking about the Regulators Sandbox in 2016, where UK, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Malaysia actually took the initiative to set up a sandbox. And that was very much taken as a progressive step to manage the gap between financial literacy and technology literacy to a very large extent. So if you were to ask me, how do we assess whether we are ready? Literacy is the key. Whether it is talent pool, whether it is awareness, whether it is the ability for us to scale, it starts off from the understanding and the adoption. While you develop literacy, the need for adoption therefore comes in. Right? So if I were to draw maybe a very surface difference between how the dot-com boom came about and how now we have the digitalization's era, how that differentiated itself was the fact that we are now in an era whereby if you, or other for myself, my 2-year-old will walk up to a screen today and the first thing she does is to swipe. Right? And that comes very natural compared to the days whereby the dot-com boom, whereby we have to learn what equality is, we have to type this multiple set of buttons to get ourselves on there, and if you freeze every time you press something wrong. So if you ask me for an assessment, it is very important for us to first promote literacy and also promote adoption. Now, are we ready as a nation? Very quickly, touching on that point, I think all of us would have gotten ourselves made aware that the EU AI Act has come to play. Right? Whether that regulation in itself is something relevant and something that we should catch up with, my personal opinion, I'm an advocate whereby innovation must always run faster than regulation. Right? And I always credit Baevinraj and Nadara for it in the sense whereby, while we have this whole set and array of policy documents, we still allow room for innovation to take place. And that's why you have the regulatory sandboxes, the piloting and the hand-holding between the regulator and the industry in a sense. Now, being part of and on that point, I would say that I would rather take the US approach to get a commitment paper in place, I think shared by Raj, my colleague. You really need to allow industry to spearhead it, come up with multiple models, run many use cases, have maybe some short pitfalls, then start managing them through policies and ethical practices, then to regulate it and then to regulate an evolving technology.
Okay, thanks so much, Mr. Jonathan. I just want to sort of bounce on that idea of literacy on AI and maybe direct this to Ms. Thiagarajah. So in your experience, especially working in probably like developing systems or working with other bodies on their implementation of AI, what kind of pitfalls do you notice or setbacks or issues from the implementation of AI that you notice could be attributed to a lack of literacy? But more importantly, what kind of safeguards do you envision or do you implement yourself?
Thanks, I think again I want to stress that AI adoption is at a very early stage. So everyone from like your technical engineer to the boardroom are all learning at the same time. So it's not like suddenly like everyone's going to adopt AI because A, it is really expensive. right? It's got to be justified by ROI, and B, the understanding and sort of like, where we can get benefits out of it is still new, right? So, I mean, maybe just sharing a bit of factoids. Cisco did a AI readiness index study end of last year, so relatively recent, and sort of we took Malaysia data and compared it with global data. So I think Malaysia is not too far off from global, but sort of 80% of organizations said that they are not ready yet on AI, or they say they are followers or laggards. They're not the pace setters. And by being pace setters, it means you're really at the forefront, right? You're really taking those LLMs and really putting in ingesting your own data, you build your own potentially like small pods of AI data centers, which I would say not yet in Malaysia. And there's many categories of readiness in terms of AI. There's the strategy readiness, you clearly know what you want to achieve with AI. There's your infrastructure readiness. It is not just about like, hey, I want to buy this, I want to do that. You need to have your data centers ready to do it. You need to have that infra ready. And you need data readiness as well, right? How are you collecting the data? Is it consistent? Is it congruent? No doubt, generative AI can deal with very messy data, but if you want to get the best results out of those use cases, your data collection needs to be, sort of good as well. And finally, like the one you mentioned on talent readiness, right? Is your organization ready? Do they understand it? Do they understand what they want out of AI? And are they ready to change with what is needed to get the best out of the technology? So I think that is the focus area, I would say now, in terms of like where we are investing as well, in terms of higher education. So we work with the likes of as well to upskill and do training with our industry-ready curriculum. So and other universities, but even mid-career as well, where we can, I would say even myself, right, how can I keep abreast of all the AI changes, technologies, and use cases?
Yeah, I think exactly what Jonathan mentioned. I mean, there's a famous tagline by the Mission Impossible. I mean, your AI missions, shall you choose to accept? Then there's a lot of this kind of readiness that you need to look into. Not just about because my rival is adopting AI, so that's where I should do in order to protect reputation of companies. I think there's a lot of this kind of awareness in terms of talents, in terms of infrastructure. I always see infrastructure is the least mentioned in AI adoption. We keep on talking about AI blueprints, AI framework, all these very high level frameworks that does not have an actionable plans. I mean, an AI would not work, like Hana mentioned, without the infrastructure. And the infrastructure we mentioned is the computing powers. If you don't have that, I think that is the missing link in these countries.
Okay, and maybe I just want to follow up with Shelina. So, speaking about infrastructure, when you mentioned that a lot of the companies that you work with, when AirAsia was forced to sort of adopt this generative, predictive AI, as it was not called at the time, what was the infrastructure like during the time, and what were some of the key challenges during its adoption?
I mean, it was basically our engineers sitting down with, I think it was Excel at the time, and working out various formulas, but they had feedback from flight operations, looking at things as detailed as how fast are you flying, what's the optimum speed, and being low cost, I can tell you the reason they limit your luggage and they charge you more for hand luggage is because it burns less fuel if the plane is lighter. Like you all probably know that. So that's the kind of details that we went into. But because I don't think the level of computing then is what it is now. A lot of it was still very much groundwork. Now I understand they have got much faster and simpler models. But coming back to use cases, everyone is correct. There are so many aspects to use cases, and the readiness. You're right. Boardrooms are learning at the same pace as your software engineers. My son is hopefully getting a degree in computer science and AI. He actually came to me and said, I want to look for a degree with that. And at the time he said it, I was like, okay, yeah, what is that and where is it, But he started 2 years ago, he's in third year now, and over the space of 3 years, the number of degrees that you can get in the UK and now in countries like Japan and Korea, which have AI as the degree, so they'll get a BSc or a BEng even in AI. That just tells you how much more importance and awareness. And interestingly enough, I was talking about internship opportunities for him, and PwC and Deloitte both said to me that, you know, if he wants to work, tell him don't stay in the UK, come back to Malaysia. Malaysia and Singapore are much more advanced than the UK. He should work in Japan, Korea, even Taiwan, and actually the next growth area is going to be here. I think somebody mentioned data centers. So we have the highest number of data centers in Southeast Asia. We have the second highest in Asia Pac, only behind India. So that's a big part of the infrastructure that's made in Malaysia. I think Raj just now spoke about, or Nurlin spoke about sustainable issues, but we need to balance all this out, right? I think Jonathan, you said AI is here. So we need to figure out not how to do it, not whether to do it, but how we're going to do it in a balanced manner.
Okay, thank you so much, Datin and Shelina. I think right now what I can conclude is that AI is here but it's still nascent. And given that nascent state of AI, I think I want to pass this to Mr. Jonathan. Taking sort of like inspiration from the AI Act, and I think everyone's talking about it right now. You mentioned that probably having a regulatory framework may not necessarily be the best idea. Can you sort of like share with us, in the context of Malaysia, are we ready to not have a regulatory framework?
That's a very layered question. Yeah, so are we ready? Okay. So if we were to look into the EU AI Act in a very surface touch and go perspective, the approach that EU wanted to take was to harmonize one single umbrella act across Europe, in terms of, and if you look into the definition of how encompassing it is, it really stretches from not just the implementer, the distributor, the deployment, the procurement. It really covers up as much as they can do. But again, I think if you map that against an evolving technology like AI, we started from OpenAI 2.0 to 3.0. I think right now we're 4 or 5. I just lost come catch up with. How do you then want to have a statutorized position to clip or manage an evolving technology? To some extent, lack of a better example, I'll say that it is as though we are trying to regulate the internet to a large extent. However, it's not impossible. I don't disagree on the fact that regulation must come to work at some point in time, because regulation somehow levels the playing field between the giants and the startups. Right? A lot of times, because of licensing regimes that Malaysia promotes, it allows the growth of startups to be unicorns because we no longer need, because licensing itself is somewhat agnostic to everything. Now, that being said, right, are we in that position to then come up with a regulatory framework to govern how it's being used here? I would personally take a position, I'll take a negative position, I'll say no. Right? But, a very big however. However, I think where it's very important is that I would take lead, and I was very, very happy when I first saw the cybersecurity bill that came down to have different sectorial leads that understands its industry itself to then shape the adoption of AI. Now, I find it very bizarre, like as what Datin Shelina said, financing is an issue, right? What is Negara doing? What's Bank Negara doing at this point in time? There is adoption of AI when it comes to KYC, but they are the best ways to start framing this framework. Medical devices, don't go and get a different ministry to do so, right? So I believe that whilst hopefully we don't have this sandbox fatigue, but to have sectorial leads govern the implementation of AI through a framework, through a certain set of standards.
Sorry, just to add that, I mean, AI is not a magic word, so we can't use AI as an excuse to say the other laws don't apply. So some of the concerns, we talk about data privacy, cybersecurity, they are dealt with in other legislation. So I'm not sure I agree that we shouldn't have regulation, but I think we need to make sure that we don't have so much regulation that it's difficult for users for whether you're a user or you're a developer or producer to understand what they have to do. It has to be. I mean, everyone has to bear in mind that AI is an enabler, it's a tool. So you shouldn't punish the tool, but it's really, I mean, there are always going to be bad in it, so it's the use that we should be watching out for.
Okay, maybe I'll pass this to Professor Chan. So you work a lot on artificial intelligence. Do you see, or in your experience, any sort of potential pitfalls or problems that might arise from artificial intelligence in your experience? But more importantly, what are the kinds of safeguards for you as an academician, you prefer?
I'll always say that any more AI models that's in the market, there's minimal flaws on this model. The flaws is always because of humanity. It's humans, right? I mean, so the model, because if you look at how the models behave, I mean, if you look at the AI models depends on data to make decisions, right? So, and of course, the data that we always use is historical data, but there's certain patterns that models will work on that. But it's always humans that is because of our selfishness, and the most important is our laziness. Alright? Because we always feel that the AI model is like a godlike decision maker. Whatever from AI is correct. So then we leave all the decisions to AI. So that is a wrong move. Okay, that is a wrong move. AI only helps us to do the recommendations, and the decision maker is still human. So that's why I mean, in a lot of developed countries, they always emphasize that humans in the loop is very important to make the AI decisions. So if you solely rely on AI, which use historical data to make a decision for you, just bear in mind that how could that work, right? So of course, like what I mentioned by the three panelists, regulation is very important, but you should let innovation flow first, all right? Because without trial, how you know that it will fail? But in Malaysia, we always, I see personally, is always a follower rather than an innovator. We always ask, has Singapore done it? If no, let's wait Singapore. And once Singapore done it, that's our idea. We have it first. I'm sure everyone heard of this from a lot of conversations. So I think as a Malaysia, we need to have a big step ahead if we really want to use or want to make an AI nation by 2030. Like Datin mentioned, now we have one of the largest data centers, as well as compute power in Southeast Asia, as well as Asia. That is what we call the leverage on that. Bear in mind that when you have all the data centers in this country, you have all the compute power in this country. It means that Malaysia eventually is a very powerful nation in the future. Let's say, unfortunately, there's a World War IV. I'm sure that Malaysia will be sanctioned from every single country. Because please don't attack Malaysia. We have a data center there, so everyone has to agree on that. We will be free from this. So that's why this driving force eventually will make Malaysia move forward. But before that, let the innovation flow rather than trying to stop it because of this human fears.
Okay, I think one last question to Datin, Shelina, just bouncing off that idea, and I really like that idea of like a lot of the flaws of AI is human in nature. So in the aviation industry, and I'm a bit of a aviation geek, what I understand is that one major principle is redundancy to prevent human error, multiple safety nets, right? in the context of AI use in industry, especially in the aviation industry, what kind of redundancies do you think industries can adopt even before regulations are in place? What kind of redundancy, so like prevention of like human error and all that, that can be adopted before even an AI act in Malaysia is implemented?
Okay, so I think if you draw analogies with aviation, you're right, there are several redundancies. When you're about to take off and when you're about to land, those are the two most risky parts of any flight, and the procedures that you go through, there's a checklist for takeoff and a checklist for landing and several steps, so those are the redundancies. But we talk about AI, a huge factor for pilot training is actually it's a module called human factor screening. And I think that takes into account what our professor says, which is that however much we train the computers, we still need human factors, because the computers can only make decisions or recommendations based on the data they know, but they're not looking through the cockpit and seeing maybe something which has not happened before, seeing a new set of parameters that they have not been trained, right? So I don't think we can run away from the humans, from the human element. It is important, and the fact that aviation, which is considered one of the highest standards of health and safety in any industry, still has a lot of emphasis on human factors. I think that's very telling. That even with the redundancies, at the end of the day, you still need humans to make that decision.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think it goes back to the whole literacy aspect that was mentioned previously. Okay, I want to shift this discussion last to probably Ms. Thiagarajah. So the NIMP calls for a whole of nation approach in achieving its goal, and I think it was mentioned previously in the previous panel. In the context of AI, and I think you mentioned quite briefly just now, what kind of collaborations between industries and governments do you see right now, but also foresee in the future when it comes to maximizing the readiness and impacts of AI?
So I think maybe two key areas. One is in the topic of education. So it could be K-12 or higher education. But recently, I think I've seen a lot more collaborations in higher education. I mean, in Cisco ourselves, we collaborate with UTM, the Faculty of AI, which was launched maybe 6 to 8 months ago, doing a sort of contributing in terms of curriculum, but doing a hackathon. So how can we encourage more sort of collaborations with higher education for industry players and tech companies, so that we can infuse the curriculum with the recent AI developments. And actually a lot of tech companies have courses as well that we can leverage. The other area is possibly on public-private partnerships. So how can we leverage these private-public partnerships to pilot AI use cases? Take, for example, do it in one factory. Or for example, like we are doing a pilot with Westport in one container terminal for like remote and AI monitoring. But do it in one small area first and pilot and see if sort of it can be implemented, it's successful, and then roll out. So how can we do more of that, encourage more of that in sort of the Malaysian ecosystem?
Thank you. And I guess there was a mention of universities there. Maybe Professor Chan, what kind of work have you done with industries as part of this whole of nation approach specifically?
Thank you very much. I think like what Hana mentioned, the private-public partnership is very important. But I don't think just limited to the universities level. I mean, it should be also from governments as well. A lot of emphasis when you look at these public-private partnerships, always emphasis on higher educations. I think it's too limited, right? But back to the question, I mean, recently, I mean, UM has done a lot of these kind of private partnership in terms of AI with a lot of global sectors. For example, we are working very closely with Cisco, and we do have a CCNA lab for almost 20 years now. And a lot of our students who actually, when they graduate as a bachelor degree of networking, they also get a CCNA, if I understand right, level 2 certification along with the degree, right? And in terms of a recent advancement of speaker mentioned about large language model, UN has recently worked with YTL corporations on launching what we call Malay MML benchmark. It's trying to leverage on how large language model able to understand our national language. Okay? So that is a very good example of the private public partnerships. And currently this is the only benchmark in the world that is looking into how LM perform outside. And when we talk about collaborations, the first thing in our mind is always about financial support. But eventually in this kind of scenario, it's not about financial support that we're looking at. Is how our students is able to look into a real world problem. I think this is what is always a missing link in the higher education. In higher education, our students, even the academicians, we are doing the research on our own that we think that industry will love it. But usually, or unfortunately, I would say that it's never the truth. Right? Whatever the industry needs is totally inverse of what we are doing in the academic world in this country. So that's why if you look at a lot of research the university has been published, okay, is solely on the university only compared to countries like Singapore or Japan, Korea. There's always the problem statement is coming from the industry, and then the higher education going to do the R&D on it and come up with a POC for industry to adopt, bring back, and then scale it up for end-to-end deployment. I think this is something that we need a lot from the Malaysian industries to come up with more this kind of case study, and then engage universities to look into this kind of problem, so that we can bridge the gap much more shorter. And this is what we're looking at. So it's not about the financial; it's about the problem statement that we need from the industry.
Okay, thank you so much. I really like the whole learning the national language part. I asked ChatGPT to translate Tanah Air and I got land water. Okay, so thank you so much to our panelists. I would now love to open one question to the floor. Yes, we have a question.
Hi, good morning. My question is to the professor. Do you see one of the key challenges in terms of companies adopting predictive AI is that the volume and the quality of the product? Is that one of the gaps or the main gap
my answer to that is yes and no. Alright, everyone's talk about AI is data. That is a fact. There's no doubt about it. But what kind of data is always an issue? Okay, so before you, if you look at how to deploy a ML model in the industry world, eventually, for me, in general, we have about 5 to 6 steps. Data is the third steps, not even the first one. A lot of time when the industry comes to development an AI model, it starts off with data first, right? Which for me is incorrect. Right? The first step that you should do when you want to deploy an ML model is that what is the goal of an ML model? What do you want the ML model to achieve? Is it like in the aviation industry, you want to reduce the cost, or you want to comply? To net zero policies, for example. You should have an aim first. Once you have an aim, second, then you only look into what is the predictive that you want from your model. Do you want your model, for example, in the aviation industry, all right? I would like to have a safe route. From the shortest path from Malaysia to London, okay? That will avoid all this war zone, but also give me, the net zero emission. Same goes to the example like Datin mentioned just now on the excessive charge on your luggage, right? So you want the predictive model to give you an answer that, given this extra allowance they give to passengers, right? What cost should I charge that for me to, in order to comply to the ESG, as well as make that ROI? So the objective must be very, very specific. But when I see a lot of companies try to adopt this kind of ML model, their objective is relatively simple. What's my ROI? Full stop. That is a huge, big question that we want a machine learning model to answer. I don't think even a human will be able to answer that kind of questions. So that is where, once you know what you want to do with the ML model, you set your very specific objective, then third is your preparation of data. Because you now know exactly what data that you want to put into the machines to learn. Alright? So that's why that comes in your question just now, that data will be very, very important once you know the first two steps. Without the first two steps, it's like what we always say is garbage in, garbage out. Because, and the worst thing is that even if it's a garbage out, you're not realizing it. Because the model looks good, 90%. So that's a problem that I always see, that we do not have a clear idea what we want the AI to do for us. So that is always a big question. You must know human in the loop. That is a key
Okay, thank you so much for the answer, Professor Chan. And with that, I think I'll call the end of the second panel session. Thank you so much to all the panelists, and thank you so much everyone for listening to them. Thank you.
We invite our